Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for watching Horton Foote, The Road to Home as part of the 2020 Houston Cinema Arts Festival. My name's Liz Frankel. I'm the Director of New Work at the Hallie Theater, and I am so pleased to be joined by the film's director, Anne Rapp, Horton Foote's daughter and longtime collaborator, Hallie Foote, as well as director Michael Wilson and actress Annalee Jeffries, two artists who've worked with Horton Foote many, many times. And I'm particularly honored to be here as a representative of the Hallie Theater because the Hallie has had a long history of getting to share Horton Foote's plays with its audience. We've done 6 Horton Foote productions over the years, beginning in 1986 with The Traveling Lady. The last production was in 2014. Michael Wilson directed the last 4 productions that we did, starting in 2001 with The Carpetbagger's Children, followed by The Trip to Bountiful, Dividing the Estate, which I believe was a remount of the Broadway production at the Hallie, and then most recently The Old Friends in 2014. Though not surprising that Michael directed all of those plays because he's very much known for his collaboration with Horton Foote, not only at the Hallie, of course, but in New York and around the country. And Hallie appeared in those 4 productions, but again, not surprising because she's appeared in so many Horton Foote productions around the country, as well as at the Hallie, of course. And then Annalee Jeffries, who's frequently been on stage at the Hallie and around the country, joined Hallie to do The Old Friends in 2014, though has done other Horton Foote plays elsewhere too. All of that admittedly was before my time in Houston, but I got to work with the 3 of you on Tender Mercies, which was in 2018 in our Hallie All New Festival, which of course was a musical adaptation of the film Tender Mercies that we just heard so much about in the documentary that had a book by Daisy Foote, and we'll talk more about that later. But I'm so happy to be reunited with the 3 of you and getting to meet you, Anne, because I really loved that documentary. So to begin with, since I think we know exactly very much Anne and Hallie while you're here, I'd actually love to bring Michael and Annalee into the conversation first and ask both of you, how did you first come to meet Horton Foote and start working with him? Michael, why don't you begin?
Thank you, Liz. I wanted to thank you for that very warm welcome and thank the Houston Cinema Arts Society for putting this panel together and for putting Anne Rapp's extraordinary film front and center this month in Houston. I just can't say enough about the movie. It is I think a very important film, both for those in the know about Horton and those who may not have really experienced his work deeply before seeing Anne's film. I met Horton when I graduated from Chapel Hill in 1987, and he came to my hometown and he spoke at the SECA, the Southeastern Center for Contemporary Art, and my mother knew that I admired his work very much. She got me there, and I went and heard him lecture about his work in the theater and film and in television, and then had the courage to go up and speak with him afterwards. And that began a very long relationship and collaboration that would continue in Houston at the Hallie Theater in 1989 when I joined the staff there. And that became a very personal time when I spent time with Horton, both in the theater in Houston, but also down at his house in Wharton with his wife Lillian. And that's when I met Hallie with the Hallie Award. Anyway, it goes back to 87, and we enjoyed a friendship and collaboration until his death in 2009 at Hartford. When we lost him when he was working on the Orphans Home Cycle, which Annalee and Hallie and I were all involved with, and which Anne features prominently at the end of the documentary. So much more to talk about, but that's my brief capsule history.
No, that's great. And how about you, Annalee? When did you first meet Horton?
1981, auditioning for Tender Mercies in New York. And that was a lovely meeting. And then Gerald Friedman directed Dividing the Estate in 91 at the Shakespeare.
Great Lakes,
thank you. Yeah. Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival. And we were trying to take it to the Broadway preview series, but because there were 13 people in the production, it's certainly was said that it was too expensive to take. And so Horton doesn't care. He just puts lots of characters in his plays. Even if they're one acts, he doesn't care. He's not scared. I love it. So that's my association. Been down to Wharton a lot. I live in Texas, so it was easy for me to visit. And doing Old Friends was wonderful at the Alley, and working with Hallie and Michael again. And that was great. And then Orphans Home Cycle in Hartford in New York. And that was just miraculous. So, you know, it takes your acting abilities to another level, because how much can you trust yourself with just the words and the punctuation? So if you allow it to come in and be trusting of yourself, not to add too much, then you'll find your way with Horton Foote in a spectacular, magical way. So I think that's right. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then Hallie, we obviously know how you met because he's your father, but I think it would be interesting to hear how did you come to start acting in his work and become not just an actor in his work, but such a key interpreter of his work?
Well, I started acting, I was a little older, I was 25. I started studying acting, and he had been working on this Orphans Home Cycle, actually. And he loved actors because he'd been an actor himself. So he came to, the woman I studied with, Peggy Fury, she would feature a writer every session. So she said, you know what, I think I'm going to do your father. And I ended up doing a scene from a play he wrote called Young Lady of Property that he saw. He liked what I did. And then he said, you know, I'm working on these plays. And I arranged a reading of it was the Orphans Home Cycle, with a bunch of my actor friends for him in my apartment. And I read the part of Elizabeth, which was based on his mother. And I heard later, he said to my mother, I think I found my Elizabeth. He really liked what I did. So we ended up going to this place called HB Studios, where you could workshop things kind of without the scrutiny of press. Herbert Burkhoff ran it, and he believed very much in protecting the artist and letting them try things, you know, and if they failed, they failed. If they succeeded, great. But there wasn't that other kind of commercial pressure on them. And we started working on this play called Courtship, which is one of the plays in this Orphans Home Cycle. And that's sort of the first time I worked with my father, and it was a very happy collaboration, and we just sort of kept moving forward. So, yeah.
That's wonderful. And so interesting to know. Now, Anne, I have the same question for you, and then so many more questions for you. But first, start off with, how did you meet Horton Foote, and then how did the idea for this documentary come about?
Well, I met Horton in 1981 when I was hired as a script supervisor on Tender Mercies, the film. And it was like everyone with Horton, it's love at first sight, because you can't not fall in love with Horton the minute you meet him. And I was, being the script supervisor, I had his amazing script in my lap, and it was one of my first jobs. That movie basically catapulted me into a movie career as a script supervisor for many years. But Horton and I were very, we found common ground on the set right away, and it didn't have anything to do with the arts or movies or theater or anything. We found this common place because you know, we would have these conversations about both coming from small towns in Texas, because I'm from a small town in the Texas Panhandle. The opposite end of Texas is Horton. But because he was the most curious man I've ever met and the best listener I've ever met in my life, he was immediately curious about what it was like growing up in a cotton farm in the Panhandle, as opposed to the cotton country that he was raised in. And we bonded over storytelling, really just telling, he would ask me things and I would ask him things. And so we after that movie was over, we maintained a correspondence. That was long before cell phones and and email and all of that. But every once in a blue moon, I'd write him a letter or card, and he would always write me back. And somehow we just stayed in some kind of touch over all those years. And it was at the very end of his life when he had just turned 90, and he was living with Hallie in California. And they would come very frequently to Horton, the homestead, and spend weeks or months or whatever there, and he would write there. And I had just moved back to Texas in late 1999. So we reconnected, and I would go down and visit them. And many, many times we would get in the car and drive around, and he would just spend all afternoon telling me stories of who lived in every house and this and that. And it took me a couple of those trips to realize, I thought one night driving home, I'm getting the backdrop of 70 years of his work. And somebody needs to record this. And honestly, I don't think I even said in the beginning, I want to make a documentary. I just said, I want to record him. So the next time I saw him, I asked if we could put a camera on him, if I could bring a camera crew down and film him telling some of these stories. He didn't immediately say yes. And it was 2 or 3 weeks later, I was in California and just happened to be out there for something, and Hallie invited me over for dinner. And he's told me that night we were at her house, he said, you know, I've thought about what you said, and I'm going to let you do it. And he went on to say that he trusted me. And that was a big thing. You know, it was right then and there. I was excited, but I also felt this big sense of responsibility. He's going to let me do this, and I've got to do this right. And so that's how the film happened. The next time he came to Horton, I was down there with the camera crew, and we spent 2.5 years filming him. And then it was only when he passed away that I started doing the interviews. We got a lot of interviews, like we got some of Hallie on those early trips, and Charles Davis and Murtis Outlaw, the 2 Horton residents in the film. But it was after that I started grabbing all the other stuff. But those first 2.5 years of this long, long journey were magnificent, because it was just spending time with him, having a camera on him, capturing what I knew that I wanted the world to know. And that's how that happened.
That's great. And well, it's just such a gift to everyone who's interested in his work. So it's so wonderful that you had the relationship and were able to make this.
Yeah.
And I'd love to ask you more about, you know, you mentioned a little bit about doing some of the interviews after he passed away and after the years of Horton filming, but what has happened in the intervening, I guess, about 10 years now? What has the process been like since the primary filming has ended up to now?
Oh, it is, as Hallie well knows, it has been an up and down experience for me. The first 2 or 3 years of this was piece cake, easy. The filming part was great, because I had the most wonderful subject matter you could have. Also, I have so much experience in production. So having cameras and figuring out how to shoot something, all that was the easy part for me. And then the middle part of the film, I had kind of a bogged down in that. I think of this process in 3 acts. I had act 1, act 2, act 3. Act 1 was shooting Horton and then shooting some of those interviews. Act 2 was this period of confusion and being bogged down, because I'm not a documentary filmmaker. And the editing process was daunting to me. I had all this amazing footage, but I had to figure out that story. And I knew what that story was in my head, but it was hard for me to even articulate it and start formulating it. And all I can say is I went through several different versions of trying to find the right person to help me edit it and wrangle this footage. And there was a 3-year period in there that it just wasn't happening. But the third time was the charm. And about 2 or 3 years ago, I locked into a group of guys here in Austin who were fabulous. And they came on board with me and helped me through this post-production process, starting with the picture editing. And then I found a beautiful composer who did the score, and all of the sound mix and the color correction and the graphics and all of that stuff. And I had to learn. I was learning all the way. But when I finally got this team that got me to the end, then we ended up with the film that you just saw. And I'm very, very proud of it. And it's been a long journey. It's pretty easy to do the math because you know that I started this when Horton was still alive. So do the math. It's over a decade. But you know what? The way I feel now is it was worth it. It was worth the wait, because I feel like there's a record of him on film that is really valuable to any young writer out there. I really want this film to get to Horton's audience, but even more so, I want this film to get to every young writer out there, because I don't believe there's one of them that can't learn something from Horton in watching his process, because he tells it so beautifully in the film. And so that's kind of my goal at this point.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And curious to know, Hallie, how involved have you been in these intervening 10 years? Had you been watching it along the way, or did you just see it when it was completed?
I would talk to Anne frequently and I would just encourage her, because I felt that something was lying in wait for her. I think the first, when she started putting it together, there was a level of frustration because she hadn't quite figured out what she wanted. I mean, she knew what she wanted to do, but as she said to me, and I'm paraphrasing Anne, she had to kind of trust her ability to do it. And finally, she just kind of dove in, and it's totally her vision. And I just said to her, I know you understand his town, you understand my father, and I totally trust what you're going to do, because I know it's going to be beautiful. And she did. And I also think it's funny. I mean, I know you think, oh, it took this amount of time, but I think this is such the perfect time for this film to be coming out right now. I think, the theater is struggling. There's all this stuff going on. Quite frankly, my father, I can't get a play done because there's no theater. So to have this sort of record of him and his writing and his filmmaking and all these things, and who he is as a writer, I think is very, very important. And I'm really grateful to Anne, and I'm grateful that it's coming out right now. I really am. And just to say one more thing, my sister also feels, Daisy, she's a writer. She said young writers should see this film because it's about a writer's process, and it's it's just something they should see, because I think it will help them understand what's required of a writer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And Anne, you mentioned there was a Houston connection along your journey too in making the film.
Yes.
Talk more about that?
Yes. I was thrilled and very pleased to be invited to be a part of the Houston Cinema Arts Festival, because it gave me I felt like it's giving me a chance to thank Houston, the arts community there in general. When we first started the film, we were still in the filming process. I had two producing partners at that time, and we were putting our own money in it. And we were all just chipping. We'd take turns paying for the motel bill in Horton or whatever. But then that got a little daunting. And we ended up getting, in the very early stages, we applied for a grant from the Houston Endowment. And we got a really good sizable grant from the Houston Endowment that allowed us to do the bulk of this film. And the reason that means so much to me is we got other grants at the end of the film, but the Houston Endowment believed in us before they saw a foot of film that I had done. They just believed in us and gave us the chance to do it. And that's just rare, what they did for us. So when I was invited to be a part of the slate of this film festival, I jumped at the chance, because I thought, what a great way to say thank you to Houston, and also to show those people, here's where your money went. And I feel like it went, to a good thing. And I think you will too. So I can't say enough thank you and express enough gratitude to the Houston arts community and Houston Endowment for allowing us to make this film.
That's so great.
Yeah.
And so you just started showing it this fall. So how does it feel now to have it out in the world more?
Well, it's so exciting. We previously were part of the Austin Film Festival that is the end of October. And so that was when this is going to be shown 3 weeks ago. And we had a great run at the Austin Film Festival. And I just found out over the weekend that we won an audience award.
Yay!
So that's always a great thing, that you come out with your first festival and you're already a winner, you know? And, but that was wonderful. It's been, you know, a little bittersweet. I will admit that this is not a normal year, because a normal year I'd be going to festivals and there'd be the red carpet and the hoopla and all that. I'm wearing my red sweater and, you know, this is my snarky sweater today. No, but, you know, that was not really a possibility for us right now. And who knows if it's going to be a possibility in 2021. There could be a festival circuit in 2021. There could not be, you know, and I had a lot of people say to me, why don't you hold it for a year? You know, and I was just like, oh God, are you kidding me? After this long, and I get this film finished. But here's the thing, aside from the fact that I don't get to do the festival circuit like I would love to do, the good news is, because productions were all shut down this last year, and that's just trickling back, it's a great market right now. So even though we're a little slim on our opportunities with festivals, what we have a bigger opportunity, I hope, with is to get the film in the right place, distributed, licensed by the right place that can get it to the most people, because they're all looking for product right now. So that's my hope. So I'm very optimistic that this was a great time. And, you know, I'm just grateful for these festivals that didn't cave and are going virtual, because people are watching virtually. That was proved by the Austin Film Festival. And I hope the same thing has happened at Houston, you know.
I just think there's also, you know, part of the silver lining, if you will, of it being virtual, the festival release of your film, is that in some ways more people are going to getting to see it by them, you know, logging on and watching the films. Maybe they can't travel to Austin or they can't travel to Houston, but Horton has a huge following in Hartford, Connecticut because of Hartford Stage.
Mm-hmm.
He's followed in New York because of Lincoln Center Theater and Primary Stages and HB, as Hallie mentioned, Signature Theater, certainly. So there's all these communities of Horton followers and devotees that I know are so excited about the film. And you know, and as Hallie was saying, thematically so important, I think, to have the film out right now, because, you know, his stories are so much about unwanted change, you know, unexpected change. And, you know, he's also the writer that wrote about the first pandemic with his play 1918. So there's so much swirling in your documentary, and for people to take solace from at this time. And, you know, I think it's also interesting, he wrote the play The Roads to Home that he directed Hallie in, and I was able to direct Hallie in later in a different part. And it's interesting, your documentary is called The Road to Home, because like in that play, the ways that we can reach home, it seems like they begin to narrow in some ways as we get older. It feels narrow right now, the path back to home.
I was waiting for the first person who would mention that connection, that sort of, you know, because I have to say, it just seemed to me one day I was trying to figure out a title. Titles are hard, you know. And one of the things I figured out very quickly that I still feel strongly about is the words Horton Foote needed to be in this title, and I wanted it to be at the beginning, you know. And so the official title of the film, Horton Foote, The Road to Home. But you know, I knew about that play, but I just thought it's not like I tried to copy that, but somehow it was subconscious in my mind, and I felt like the way we did this film, that I filmed him only in Horton. That's really except for the footage in the New York theater, Everything you see in this play is important. And he tells his entire story in reflection in his 90s. And if that's not the road to home, I don't know what is. And even up to the ending of the play, when he says, you know, I've tried to write about New England and whatever, but this is my home. And you just feel that sense in him of that. And it just kind of seemed to be the right title, you know.
Well, it's perfect.
And home is such a, oh, sorry, you go.
Go, Hallie. No.
No, it's just, I was going to say home is such an important theme in his work, you know,
Yes.
home, place. So I think it's kind of a perfect title.
Well, I want to also say something based on what Michael mentioned. I would say that I have had so many emails and calls, and the response to this film has just been incredible. I'm just overwhelmed and humbled by it, actually. But I would say if I had to pick out 2 words that people say over and over again, is humanity. Mm-hmm. We need a dose of humanity so badly right now. And how wonderful it was to sit down for an hour and 15 minutes and see a man who was just, the entire structure of his being is based on his humanity. Wow. As a man, as a writer, as an artist, the whole thing. So that's something that I think it makes this play so timely. I mean, this documentary is so timely and so important right now. And the other word that I've heard over and over is comfort. Like, oh my gosh, did this comfort me? You know, and that's kind of what Michael just said. What a comfort to see a man of such integrity and, you know, and such humanity in a world right now where we're barraged with kind of the opposite, you know. Mm-hmm. And so I think even though it took me this long and I lamented it for so many years, maybe this is the time it was supposed to come out, you know, maybe this is the time.
And it's
I also felt, sorry, Mike.
No, Annalee, you go.
So I also felt that it was spiritual as well, without a hammer over the head, you know, and without it being obvious, but it was so spiritual, deeply moving, and it allowed the individual to hear that spirituality. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was really beautiful.
Well, you know, as Bill Heck, our beautiful friend and actor who played Horton's father in the Orphan's Home Cycle, he says at the end of the film, it's one of my favorite little moments. He says at the end of the film, it kind of hits you over the head with a feather, but you know, you really feel it. And that's essentially what Annalee just said. That's the spirituality of it, I think.
And one of the interviews that you do with Horton in the film that's so moving to me, and I believe that he uses the word comfort. He's walking through the graveyard there in Wharton, and he's pointing out all of his different relatives and the people in town that he knew, and his family. And he says it's very comforting to him. A lot of times you think about walking through a graveyard and that it's sad and that it, you know, but he spoke about it as if it was a way of bringing everyone back together, both in terms of place and a spiritual passage, Annalee, as you were just mentioning. But that was a comfort, the kind of rhythm of life.
Right.
You know, and very beautiful. It also, I thought, gave a great window on how unflinching and how unsentimental he is. Yep. You know, and there you really see it so close up. And
that moment where he says, you know, he's on the front row, which is the Foote row, and he says, he's pointing out who's there, and he says, my wife is there, and I'll be there. That's, you know, it's kind of a beautiful, realistic moment that then, of course, a beautiful story that Hallie tells as they're walking out of the cemetery, where about Geraldine dying between 2 shows. And I'm the luckiest person on the planet because I get to act twice today. And she related that to him, how lucky he felt till the end of his life that he got to do the work that he did.
Well,
And also, it's funny. I had friends that watched it from Wharton, and the first thing they did was they went out to the cemetery.
Oh,
Oh.
I
wow.
kind of wanted to, yeah. My friend Paulette and her husband, yeah. And she said,
Oh, wow.
yeah, yeah. And she was sort of talking about, she said, and I didn't know you said, because we have our names on the back of our parents' graves, you know, each kid, like Horton, Hallie, Daisy, Walter, and then a little saying. And she said, that's so cool. I didn't know that. So it was sweet. Yeah.
The other thing that's striking in your documentary, that's again, you don't really discover what your film is, I think, with documentaries, but what I know about them is until you're editing it. And what was great is that you take that interview with him in the graveyard, and then not long after, there we are with the coffin in Egypt. And she's talking in her speech about where she'll be, you know, out on the plains. I mean, it's so incredibly moving, and the juxtaposition of his interview to the play that he wrote years before is just so astounding. And
Right.
it's a great revelation of the documentary, though, I think. And it's a great, you know, and within that 75 minutes, you were able to make those kinds of connections.
Well, you know, the funny thing about it is the way I look at it now, because I'm in hindsight, I go, the pieces were all there, you know, they were all there. I just had to find them and put them in the right order, but they were all there, you know, all along. And as Hallie mentioned earlier, I went through a long period of time with doubt and not trusting myself. And that lag period I talked about, that was because I was waiting on someone to come rescue me and show me how to do this and help me do this and, you know, find this story for me. And one day I finally just said, it's do or die right now. You either find it or you walk away from it. And I knew I would never walk away from it. And so once I opened myself to trust, those pieces they just fell into place. They fell into place with my guys, my editors. They saw them too. You just, I don't know, once you dive into all the footage, and the only sad thing about this whole thing is I have so much good footage on the cutting room floor that never made the film. It killed me. I could make 2 more Horton Foote movies as powerful. I swear to God I could.
Well, you remember, we all, I think, know and love the documentary Grey Gardens, right? About the, you know, the
B.A. Beals.
Right.
Mazels, yeah.
Yeah, big eating, little eating. Anyway, well, you know that it took like 6 years to make that film, and because of the editing process that you were referring to earlier. And then, of course, they had all this extra footage, and they did eventually turn out some sequel documentaries. Those are not as known as well as the first one, but who knows what's going to happen on down the line. But your film right now, it also just reflects, like, one of his most obviously famous plays is The Trip to Bountiful. You know, first on television, then Broadway, then motion picture, then television movie again after a Broadway revival. And her journey, Mother Watts, Carrie Watts, to get back home from Houston, and both her spiritual and her will, her physical and emotional will to get out of that house and get back, but also the real struggle to get there. It's so a great parallel to in your film, because she goes through her dark period where she has given up hope, and finally she just says, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it on my own. Right. And she comes to Thelma and says, you know, I tried to go by train, but there were no more trains anymore. She used to love the trains. That's what I mean by the roads to home becoming this road to home, because even in Trip to Bountiful, all these various ways that used to exist don't exist anymore. Right. So she finally, the sheriff is the one that drives her out there. And of course, home is not exactly as we remember it, is it? But it still can be comforting.
Yes.
You know, I just think.
Yeah, you know, I've as you can probably guess, I've lived with this footage, all footage, for over a decade, and I've watched it over and over, and then I've watched the compilations of the film over and over and over. So you would think I'm so jaded and so just, you know, numb to the emotion. I never watched this film. If I turned it on right now, after we got off this, I went to my link and I looked at it again. I cry. I get a tear every time Geraldine Page gets out of that car and walks out there and adjusts her purse over her shoulder and looks at that old shack, fallen down shack in the high grass, and says, "I'm home." I'll watch this film 1,000 times, and I will not be able to suppress a tear at that moment. You know, it is one of the most that hits home for me. You know, and we will go into that, but everybody relates to something like that in his plays and in his films, and that's my moment, because I have a whole thing about my home, and so you know, that's the beauty of his work.
You know, and for people that don't know, if they took 59 South out of Houston right now, and then took the exit, that's about a little under an hour to Horton.
59 miles southwest. 59 miles southwest from Houston, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then they would be on the old highway by the TP Motel and then the Horton Historical Museum. And then, as Lily used to describe, you'll cross where there used to be railroad tracks. And then that's when you'll take the left that gets you onto Milam and Houston Street, where he lived. But it's still there. They, you know, the house that his parents that were given to his parents, the 1918 houses. I don't know. It's an extraordinary journey that you can still make to that town, and
his grandparents' house is behind it. So it's all there.
I can't tell you. I can't tell you how grateful I am for the town of Horton, because from the very first time we went down there with our cameras, we had the support of everyone. Charles Davis, Murtis Outlar, Van Ramsey, who's also in the film, and his mother, who was still alive at the time. They were very gracious to us, did dinners for us. Charles took us out to his river property. We were totally taken care of in that town and supported, and have been every single time I've ever gone back there. And of course, Hallie would just open the house up to me if I needed more photographs, just go in and ransack the photographs, just bring them back, you know. And it was a town that opened their arms to me, you know, in a way, especially the people who knew Horton. And that library, we got a lot of archival material out of the Horton Historical Museum, I mean. And so I'm very grateful to the town of Horton for what they contributed to the film.
And what Charles and Murtis in their interviews, what they contributed is such a unique perspective that only they have, and that's another great grab and get of the film. That, you know, and I love how prominent they are in the movie, because there's just so much grace and manners and history in their stories of relating of their relationship with Horton and their family's relationship.
Am I allowed to ask a question to everybody? I would just like comments, a little bit of comments, because I believe in it so much, about the monologues and the actors and that part of the film.
Well, and I actually was going to ask you about that, because I thought that was such an interesting choice. I feel like I'm used to watching a documentary about an artist and you get a clip of them performing, or if it's a playwright of, you know, filming of what happened on stage. But you made the choice to have some of that, but also have these monologues that really let us hear the words and sample so many different plays. So, I mean, I'd be interested, how did you make that choice, which I thought was a fantastic one?
Well, being a novice documentary filmmaker, and I was having trouble figuring out and maneuvering the world of getting theater clips, because getting theater clips is a lot more difficult than getting film clips. Film clips are pretty easy to get. They're online, you know, if they're on YouTube, they're fair use. Film clips are easy. Theater clips were more difficult. I was having a hard time kind of maneuvering, even watching them, much less buying them. Right. And so, you know, we early in the game, my two original partners and I, we talked about the idea of so what if we just do our own version of that? We put actors on stage just reading his words. And so that sort of gestated for a while. And then when I got this last team that came on to help me put it together, one of those guys, not even knowing we'd already talked about this, he asked me one day, he said, what would you think about putting actors on stage? And I said, you know, great minds think alike, I guess. So we kind of honed it down to what it was, just a black box situation. And the one decision I kind of had to make is, a lot of people say to me, you need to go out to Hollywood and you need to get famous people to do these monologues. And I resisted that from the beginning. And they were like, oh, you just don't want to go to the trouble or the expense. And I'm like, no, that has nothing to do with it. That would be a fun thing to do. But I think for the audience, I think it's better if we find really good actors that are not household names. And so that when you get to those parts of the film, they're not looking at the celebrity, they're listening to the words from the beginning. And if you've got good enough actors to deliver them, they will be. So I stuck to my guns on that, and I'm proud of it, you know, in that way, because I do think those monologues deliver the words in a beautiful way. And if you go back and dissect the film, we used them in one way, we used them as chapter breaks. They would be between going to a new idea. But they also did offer the poetry of his language in relation to something that we were just talking about. Case in point, Michael was talking about how we did Horton in a kind of unsentimental way in the cemetery. What leads into that is Ludi, the monologue with Ludi, that wonderful actor Mark Puey saying, Mama, I don't want to keep remembering. And, you know, it's not good for me to remember. And then here's Horton going through the cemetery remembering. So we tried to use that poetry of his language as well. But I thought they served the film well. I loved the fact one of my producers said, let's change them to black and white. They popped dramatically. That helped. And I'm very proud of the monologues in the film. So, but I would love to know other people's opinions about that.
Oh, you're muted, Michael.
I think we've just heard why Horton trusted you. And I mean, he obviously thought about your invitation to bring a camera crew in. He considered it. And then after that much reflection, he chose you. And this whole aspect of the film is so unique. It's so unexpected. It's really a distinct aspect of the documentary. And it's interesting that since the film was made by you, who comes from the film world largely, Anne, that you got how important his work in the theater is to him. Yes. And it takes me back to the first time I met him, because at that point, I thought it was like a choice. You either had to do, you know, either theater or film and TV work. It wasn't like you could do both. I guess I wasn't really looking at the full breadth of his career. And that's what I asked him. I said, I'm just graduated. What should I do? I've got this offer to go, study playwriting up at Cambridge, or, I've been out in LA and love television and film. He said, well, I don't give advice. That's how he answered it, first thing out of his mouth. And he says, but I will tell you that I've had my most satisfying experiences working in the theater. And you innately know that. It's clear from, not to diminish all his tremendous film accomplishments, giant, but his work in the theater is, I think, what he led in his heart with.
He always said it was his second home, the theater, right?
Well, it goes back.
He loved the theater. He would go to see his plays. People thought he was crazy. He never missed a performance if he could help it. And it was funny because often if there was a play with intermission, they'd have to hold the curtain because all these people would sort of surround him and want to chat with him and talk to him about the play, and and he just loved it. And just back to the monologues, what I really love about them is, you're right, it's sort of actors we don't know. And I think even the woman you got to read, Myrtle Bledsoe, the last monologue, she's not an actor at all. And it really, yeah. And my sister and I are both saying, what happens is you end up listening to the language, how he writes, and you're not stuck like watching an actor so much. And it kind of like they pop out at you. And so, and you could see like there were like almost chapter breaks
Right.
to kind of help move you from place to place in the film.
Yeah, and it was beautifully lit. I thought it was very elegantly lit.
Yeah, and it's funny we did that in color, but then we went back and that they have so many wonderful bells and whistles and digital processes now where you change color to black and white in many ways, and our color correction guy kept tweaking it and enhancing this and that, and next thing I know, they just sort of pop out as kind of something wonderful.
Well, you've done a wonderful job, just a wonderful documentary, and I am impressed. We all are, and hope that this has a life way, and I know it will have a life way beyond. So congratulations, Anne.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anne.
Yes, it's fantastic.
That's the goal, for Horton to continue to have this big life that he deserves. This film is all about Horton. It's not about me or anybody else. It's about Horton.
And all of us need him. All
you.
of the audiences who need him.
Yeah.
But I think that's a great place to end it. The film is a wonderful merging of theater into film, and it's all about Horton. So I think we now need to wrap up, but it's been so wonderful talking with all of you. We could go on forever, but we'll end here for now.